A Russian Defense Ministry serviceman was blown up in Crimea. At least that is what the occupier's FSB has claimed. Local social media channels note that the target was likely Robert Shageyev. There is no official confirmation of this at the moment. In 2014, he betrayed his oath, surrendered the only Ukrainian submarine, the Zaporizhzhia, and defected to the invaders. Russian security forces have already announced the alleged detention of a suspect. How significant a figure was this defector to the occupation forces, and why do such individuals remain potential targets? We will ask about this and more to military analyst and Armed Forces of Ukraine serviceman Alexander Musienko. He is on the line with us. Mr. Alexander, good evening.
Greetings.
So first of all, tell me, how significant a figure was Robert Shageyev to the occupation army, in your opinion?
Well, it's hard to say. He held one of the, let's say, positions right now directly in the Black Sea Fleet Command, was responsible for the implementation and planning of tasks, the execution of these tasks directly by the submarine command. So, in fact, he continued to serve in this capacity directly within the Russian Black Sea Fleet.
Does this incident indicate that it is becoming increasingly dangerous for the Russian military and collaborators on the peninsula?
Well, actually, it must be said that it's dangerous for the enemy everywhere, as we can see, because they are being hit, they are being struck from the air. We are intensifying special operations in occupied Crimea. Well, the goal is, of course, the demilitarization of the peninsula and the reduction of the military presence there. You can see that the defense forces have made significant progress in that Russia is now effectively squeezed all the way to Novorossiysk, but even there, it doesn't feel safe. The defense forces are doing everything possible to strike military targets in the territory of occupied Crimea, and, of course, to continue measures for demilitarization, well, in every sense of the word.
And could Ukrainian military personnel who defected to Russia after 2014, could they be important targets for Ukraine now, and why?
Well, it's hard to say. I think that representatives of the special services could comment on this better if they deem it necessary.
All right, let's talk about the Russians' shelling tactics. Russia has noticeably increased the number of massive strikes, and this is against the backdrop of daily isolated attacks, relying on jet-powered drones and ballistics. What is the enemy's actual endurance capacity? How long are they capable of maintaining this pace, and in general, what should we be preparing for?
Well, regarding direct missile strikes, there are reports, there is information from our military intelligence, the main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, which provide data that the enemy has now actually exceeded its production plans for missiles, especially when it comes to cruise missiles and Zircon missiles. As for ballistics, specifically the Iskanders themselves, it is currently 60 to 65 missiles per month, again according to reports from military intelligence, which the enemy can use for strikes on the territory of Ukraine. And strictly speaking, these are the main threats. We understand that today, whereas previously the enemy could launch 2 or 3 large-scale strikes using ballistics, now there could be more. And as for isolated strikes, say 2, 3, or 5 missiles, of course, the enemy can use more. But there are 2 elements. The first is that the armed forces of Ukraine are systematically working to reduce capabilities, that is, to counter ballistic strikes, even in conditions where we are still awaiting additional supplies of Patriot missiles. Even under these conditions, measures are already being taken, and at least one large-scale ballistic missile attack was thwarted this week on the night of August 9th to 10th. And strictly speaking, a search for solutions is underway on how, let's say, to strike the launch systems and directly counter their deployment and strikes on the territory of Ukraine. This is, of course, alongside the fact that constant work is being done to ensure that we eventually receive Patriot and an anti-ballistic missile system. But while this work is ongoing, measures are being taken so that the enemy cannot fully utilize their entire complex of missiles for strikes on the territory of Ukraine.
Mr. Alexander, regarding this thwarted Russian strike, it was supposedly meant to take place on the night of August 10th. So how are the defense forces able to act preemptively?
Well, by oversaturating the airspace in three regions, Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod, the defense forces launched a large number of drones of various types. This effectively led to a certain amount of chaos in the enemy's surveillance systems, particularly on their radars. And strictly speaking, they started using their air defense systems and at that moment decided, well, to postpone, not even necessarily to abandon perhaps, but at the very least to postpone and stop the deployment of their own ballistic missile launchers and try to actually carry this out at another time. Then the next day they launched a strike, but to a much lesser extent. These were mainly Onyx missiles, not ballistic Iskanders as they had planned. In other words, saturation of the airspace was employed, which created a certain amount of chaos, and some other elements were used, well, which it is too early to talk about publicly right now.
And what technological solutions or resources are the defense forces currently lacking in order to continue acting proactively and destroying launch systems before they fire from within the territory of the Russian Federation?
Well, I would say that, of course, the armed forces are expecting additional supplies of missile weaponry. This includes both cruise and ballistic missiles. We must talk about the fact that we need to strike the military-industrial complex, factories that are, in one way or another, involved in this Russian military-industrial chain and produce components and parts for Russian Iskanders and other missiles. In other words, we need missiles. In any case, ballistic missiles would be very useful, just like cruise missiles. The second thing is, of course, strengthening our reconnaissance and intelligence capabilities. In other words, reconnaissance capabilities that allow us to detect in real time the locations of specific launchers and their readiness for launch, effectively within Russian territory. Partner intelligence is very important, especially the satellite intelligence that the United States of America has, which possesses the relevant capabilities and could be very useful to us for this. Well, first and foremost, these are the three most important elements that, well, are worth mentioning here. Because intelligence and detection are the key here. Well, and strike assets. Of course, we see that we are producing more drones and receiving them from partners, but we need even more to carry out strikes both on factories and directly on the launchers and the complexes in general.
In the context of missiles, which we really need right now, Patriot missile manufacturers are afraid that Ukraine will be able to produce them faster and cheaper than the US, which is why they're slowing down the transfer of licenses. This is according to The Atlantic. How justified are such concerns from representatives of the American military-industrial complex?
Well, I think they're unfounded. First of all, why? First of all, because this can be discussed directly with company representatives. I don't see a problem at all. This discussion that I'm observing in the media right now, you see, if there is a general political decision, the one that was announced, and the one that was voiced by the President of the United States, Trump, during the meeting with the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, at the NATO summit in Ankara, well, if there is such a general, overarching decision that Ukraine should, after all, be granted the right to licenses, then what comes next? Next comes the discussion. It's clear that this is sensitive technology. It's clear that the United States doesn't have as much experience as some might think, specifically in transferring licenses. Clearly, this is somewhat new for them as well. Obviously, the manufacturing company will set certain conditions, they will raise certain risk factors, and discuss certain precautions. That is normal. If that is the only issue, then I think these questions can be resolved through discussions and mutual consultations and deliberations. It is normal that during the signing of such important, fateful documents of a strategic nature, including for companies like Raytheon and Boeing, there's a discussion of risks, concerns, and so on, and their subsequent resolution. Therefore, if the issue is only about this and everything is fine with the political will, I don't see that there will be any problems during these consultations.
Nevertheless, Mr. Oleksandr Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the U.S. has allegedly agreed to monthly deliveries of missiles for the Patriot systems. In your opinion, will these volumes be enough for us at all?
Well, you see, the president of Ukraine specified in an interview with CNN how much we need, focusing on the volumes that the United States of America can currently provide. And indeed, we are talking about 10%. This is the ideal picture of the reserves that are in the United States that we would receive, and it would seriously strengthen us. And consultations are ongoing. I can say that now, you see. Certain signals have also appeared from Poland that they are ready to transfer them. And I think that we are now at such a stage, especially it will start, most likely, from September, maybe even earlier, when, well, we still hope that the missiles will arrive in Ukraine. I can say that the intensity of Russian strikes right now indicates that they, among other things, feel there is a window of opportunity for themselves. Against the backdrop of a missile shortage, they're carrying out strikes more intensively. And considering the fact that the enemy is practically not building up reserves, but is maximally utilizing the entire complex of missiles they have, literally produced straight from the factories, it indicates that they are in a hurry. That is, they understand that in the long run, Ukraine will eventually receive missiles, at least to meet its basic needs. An active work is currently underway on this. Of course, there are objective difficulties there. The American war against Iran, that's the use of a large number of interceptor missiles and so on. We understand all of this, but there are two important arguments. The first, American companies have received over $50 billion for missile production through 2032. So this is a very long-term perspective. That means the money will be there. That means they need to increase production and issue licenses, among other things. They have incentives for this. Second, President Trump himself says that, in fact, production in the United States will be ramped up now. Third, if the President of the United States says that the shortage of missiles in the U.S. is fake news, well, we are certainly ready to test that in practice. If the United States transfers these missiles to us now, as we are calling for, it will be the best demonstration that America really has a lot of weaponry and that it does not threaten their defense capabilities. Therefore, strictly speaking, work on this is ongoing. It is difficult to talk about the exact number of missiles right now. I don't think it will be disclosed immediately, but still, the situation here is not completely deadlocked or hopeless.
I suggest we also talk about the Russian orbital network. Serhiy Flash Beskresnov warned that the Rasvet satellite network, which the Russian Federation is currently deploying, could become a serious problem for Ukraine. And analysts, in turn, say that it could turn out to be even more effective than Starlink. Explain, what exactly is the main threat of this system?
Well, right now, there is talk that Russia really wants to create its own communication system and use it in the war against Ukraine. That is, essentially, first of all, for communication, for ensuring the operation of the internet network, for ensuring appropriate connection and communication between headquarters and military command bodies. And of course, in order to control drones by boosting the signal and having the ability in real time to guide them to targets, to control them, and so on. These are the main threats. But what needs to be said as of now? As of now, Russia, in July, they first launched some at the beginning of the year, and then in July, they launched another certain number of satellites, put them into orbit, and now they have a window of opportunity, like 2 to 4 hours over certain regions of Ukraine, when they can use this network. Not everywhere. In order for them to use it fully, they need several hundred, 500 or more, of these relevant satellites that will operate in real time and exchange data. Plus, it's very important when we talk about potential countermeasures that no matter what, we can't actually reach the satellites in space. But in terms of countermeasures directly on Earth, the enemy can use antennas, they can use the corresponding terminals, access gateways, and so on. Countermeasures are already being developed so that at a certain moment, we are ready to implement a plan, including against the Rasvet complex. There are operations of a different nature. These are, of course, those that concern direct influence on Russia and those that the president of Ukraine discusses with the intelligence community. Well, for now, we are monitoring the development of this situation. There are certainly risks for us, but the number of satellites that Russia has launched into orbit is still insignificant.
Thank you very much for this conversation. This was Alexander Musienko, a military analyst and a serviceman of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.